Hi, welcome everybody. Today we're going to do CMS data cleanup with Excel, and it's a little bit more unusual than our other webinars. We are going to talk through some of the actual execution of data cleanup, and in this particular case, using Excel as the tool to do that cleanup. So it's going to be a bit of a walkthrough, as well as talking about the data cleanup actual functionality. Quick note about me, I'm founder and director of Relicura. I have 20 years in archives, museums, and cultural heritage organizations, and in addition to being a business owner and consultant, I am an author, speaker, and people first advocate. Some housekeeping. So a link to this recording will be provided along with all the resources that we cover. Those links will be sent out via email to everybody who registered, and that will happen about 24 hours after the premiere. And then this session is pre-recorded, and that's so that I can deliver the maximum amount of information to you, and then I can answer follow-up questions or share more resources in the chat. And speaking of the chat, please feel free to share your own examples and resources. It's the YouTube platform, so YouTube will require that you have a Google or YouTube account at least in order to participate in the chat. So just be aware of that. And because it is a YouTube platform, it does provide the typical YouTube functionality. We've got the access to the auto closed captioning. You can expand the size of the video depending on what screen you're watching it on, things like that. And then just a final note, please remember and respect that this content is my intellectual property and subject to copyright. So disclaimer first, and this I think was pretty clear in the description for today's webinar, is that I am not an Excel or query writing expert. I know just enough to get myself into trouble with data cleanup and to help make my job a little easier in terms of data remediation. So I do know quite a bit in terms of the typical data messes that we run into. I know quite a bit about how CMS will or will not take certain data, and therefore some of the very specific tools in Excel that can be quite helpful to our type of work. So not an Excel expert. There may be those of you out there, and that is wonderful, but that is not the point of today's webinar. Okay. Table of contents, and then we'll hop into it. We'll do just a brief overview of how to prepare for the data cleanup process. We have done a whole other webinar, at least one, maybe two, on the review of data, preparation for cleanup, etc. I'll show you a link to those in a minute, and you can catch those at a different viewing, but we're going to do just a brief overview and then actually get into the cleanup part. We are going to cover the Excel views, and what this means is just the orientation to the screen that you're looking at. If you are not familiar with working with spreadsheets and your data in that spreadsheet format, it can be a little discombobulating. We'll then, of course, get into Excel tools, and there are different layers of Excel tools, so we'll get into just a couple of those as we go through today, and we'll be coming back for a part 2 next month. And then just a brief where to get help, and I think you'll find it a bit amusing as to what some of those resources are. Speaking of resources, I do want to highlight a collaboration that Oregon Heritage and myself did last year. We put together the Heritage Organization's Guide to Creating and Cleaning Up Collection Information. It is made possible by the Oregon Cultural Trust, and especially with the participation and support of Deschutes County Historical Society, we were able to put this guide together and give specific concrete examples with Deschutes data. So I definitely encourage you, go and get that free e-resource, and thank you very much to Oregon Cultural Trust, Deschutes County Historical Society, and of course, Oregon Heritage. And webinars, if you have not kept up to date on cataloging webinars, we do have a couple you can catch on demand. The first one, creating a catalog workflow that works for you. It's going to talk about concept of cataloging, Best practice is a good overall like cataloging 101. The second one is about data cleanup, where to begin. And so if you are ready to hop into cleanup and getting some of that initial preparation and analysis underway, you will want to check that out before getting into the actual cleanup, which is today's focus. So preparing for the cleanup, what you'll need. You need an export of your data. So the premise of today's webinar and doing cleanup is based upon the ability to export your data from a collections management system in most cases, sometimes digital asset management system, but essentially an export of your data from that system that you can then edit and then re-import with your edits. So it's a great way to be able to do bulk editing, bulk updating, and have it be re-signed and updated to your records in that system. So you'll need an export of the data, and you'll need it in a spreadsheet format. In most cases, the spreadsheet format is the only option, though there are some fun and creative other ways I have seen data be exported. For our purposes today, and for the cleanup tools that we're using, we need it in a spreadsheet format, which will usually always be the CSV or the comma separated value option. As we get into this, review your data and identify areas for cleanup. So what those areas typically are and what to look for is covered in that other webinar I mentioned, but we need to essentially have a sense of what is it that we're cleaning up. Ensure you know how to interpret the data accurately. So this is especially important if you are not familiar with looking at your data in the spreadsheet format, and especially so if the fields, as in the next point, if the fields aren't clearly identified as column headers. Some systems are great and they assign very obvious human readable column names for each of the data columns. Others use abbreviations or just nonsensical ways of identifying the columns, and you might have to do some sleuthing essentially to figure out which data is where. And then check to make sure that there's an identifier for the records listed. Each of your records should have some sort of system assigned unique number to help differentiate it from any other record in your system. And that number is going to be incredibly important for that re-importing into your CMS. It is also going to be important for our purposes as we're doing data cleanup and transformation, having that unique identifier as like a homing beacon to make sure that our data stays with the records it's supposed to be with is incredibly important. Things to keep in mind. So I recommend, as we're looking at this data, taking that unique identifier and having that be your far most left column. And I recommend sorting it before you even start changing anything else, sorting it from smallest to largest so that it is always going to be a default sort that you can match on. Otherwise, as you get the spreadsheet, if it's sorted based on some other data column, if you're not aware of what that is, it can be almost impossible without using formulas to rematch up your data once it gets out of place. And for each area of data touched, I recommend creating a duplicate copy. So as you take that export, that is a copy of your data, but just so that you don't have to get another fresh export if you mess up the first one, I recommend for each of the areas that you are cleaning up, just do like a copy paste of those couple columns, transform them in a different spreadsheet, and then put them back into your official export. Just to help, because you never know, first of all, what's going to impact other areas, depending on what you're transforming, and just to make sure that no matter what happens, you still have a good set of data if you're not quite sure where you went wrong. Test your cleanup to ensure it was completed as you intended, and especially if you are just starting out with some of these tools, definitely check yourself, make sure things transformed in the way that you intended, and before you move too far on and can't hit the undo button. And finally, each column is a field, represents a field, and that particular field in your CMS. So when it is going back into your CMS via an import, you need to make sure that that field remains the same. So even if it has like a really weird, awful name, it needs to keep that really weird, awful name in order to know where that data is supposed to go in the CMS. All right, for Excel, there are essentially two main areas of where data transformation can happen. It can actually be in Excel itself, and as you are used to working with it, as we're doing our walkthrough, I will usually call like the basic version of Excel. That is where we'll spend part of our time as we begin today. And then there is the advanced version of Excel Power Query. And at least in my version of Excel, it's like this neon green data power query button in the data tab on the far left. That particular one we will be covering next month in our advanced version. So just know that there are the two different areas. They offer similar but very different functionality in terms of data transformation and manipulation. And there's a time and place for each of those tools. So I'll highlight the ones that I use the most frequently in both of those areas. Excel views. So to orient you to the spreadsheet, and we'll take a look at one in a moment, remember that the column header, so row across the top, each of those is going to be a column header, and that column header is going to be the field name for your collections management system data. And each of the rows after that are going to represent a record within your system and have that unique identifier at that far left. And if it's not at the far left, I encourage you to move it to the far left, just in case the system didn't put it there the first time. What we're seeing here is some fake data that I have put together and done some transformation on, and it's essentially to demonstrate to you some of the various data cleanup things that can be present for us, most typically in archival or museum collections. I realize quite a bit of data, and so depending on your screen size, you may not be able to read the specifics of it, and that is totally fine. You do not actually need to read or understand the data currently on the screen. What we want you to take away is how to actually view and interpret this data, as well as how to transform it. So we'll make sure that we cover those in a way where you can see it. For some orientation before we hop into using tools, if you've not worked with your data in a spreadsheet format before, this is what it looks like, and is what it looks like for like 99% of the collections management systems and even quite a bit of the digital asset management systems nowadays. What we have across the top here in this very first row is going to be our column headers. Column headers are to indicate fields where our data is going to go into, or where it currently lives and will be updated. And it's going to have all of the data fields, in this case, that you exported from your data in the CMS. So when you are in your particular collections management system, you export your data, you get a spreadsheet, typically a CSV file format, which is comma separated value. We open it up in Excel, and we're going to do some view manipulation to help you see different data cleanup issues, as well as covering tools. So as you get this export, you open up the spreadsheet, you've got the fields across the top here in this very first row. Some of them will be very obviously named. Others may be abbreviations or maybe even not like human readable. And so if that is the case, spend a little bit of time with your data to understand which field it is coming from. And you may even want to add a temporary row right underneath your column to put in like that plain human language speak of what the field is, especially if it's somewhat hard to interpret and you may need a reminder. And then on this left-hand side here, I want to point out that each of our records in our collections management systems, or DAMs, they will have a unique identifier. Every system is different in terms of what that identifier looks like or how it's assigned. And when we are exporting our data, it should come with whatever unique record ID it was assigned. This is to let us know which record it is from. It's also to help the system know when this data comes back into it, which records it's supposed to do the data assignment and update for. So it's a very important column. We're also going to use it to help be the key that we always have in place within a certain sort arrangement, because as we work within transform these fields, we may want to do some different, for example, alphabetizing, sorting, so we can see entries that are similar but maybe spelled a bit differently, or perhaps entries that are singular and then versus plural. So with us messing with some of the arrangement and sorting of these, it's important to make sure we're keeping the unique ID with it so that we can always sort and match and marry up the transform data to its appropriate record. Okay, now that we've had a chance to get oriented to your data in an Excel spreadsheet format, we are going to first take a look at some of the tools that help present your data in the best way possible for analysis, or for the best way possible, in my opinion. We're going to take a look at freeze views. We're going to take a look at filters, which you will later find out I use for almost all of the cleanup in some fashion. We will take a look at duplicate identification, and we'll take a look at sorting. Okay, one of the first things I want us to do is lock in the top row here for maintaining our view. And as we pull this up in view form, and I'm on a Mac, so your Excel versions may look slightly differently, but we have a few different freeze options in terms of freezing and unfreezing panes. So in this case, I've unfrozen the top row here, as well as I think I had the column frozen. If I want to go ahead and freeze a set of those anyway to go up and left or right, we have that option. Or we can go ahead and just do like freeze first column. This can be particularly handy if you want to keep the unique identifier within your vision here, but still being able to scroll across what could be quite a few different fields as you go from left to right. Or of course, we can do this top row here as we go down through the record. And this is helpful when we're looking specifically at one field during our cleanup, which tends to be how my brain focuses on both the review and the cleanup. We can keep this field in our vision and be able to go through with this field in our vision as we go through the what could be hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of records in your data. One of the other things that I want to make sure you're aware of is the filtering option. And this is probably the tool I use the most. So at the moment, your spreadsheet will likely not come with the little arrows over here in each of the cells. I have just cleared the filters out so I can reapply them. And you can do that by going in my particular view, it's the home menu, and all the way towards the right is the sort and filter. We're going to add the filter. It will automatically, because I highlighted the whole first row, it has given me this little arrow in each of the cells in the far right side of each cell. When we click the arrows, it will give us a hit list essentially of all of the data entries in that particular field. For the date fields, it's going to have quite a variation for every unique set of data. If there happens to be a duplication, like maybe there's two record entries that have a 1792 to 1872 date, it will only record that one entry as unique data. And so this can be somewhat helpful. For example, if we're over here in Creator, we know we're going to have creators that overlap and perhaps are creators of several collections. We can expand this filter window out. And for my Excel, it's going to slow it down a little bit because there's quite a few creators in here. And if we don't want to see all of them and instead just want to see, okay, for Zelma, do we have more than one item, or I'm only interested in seeing Zelma stuff, we can apply the filter. And indeed, there is only the one record result here for this particular collection. When I am in the filter, we can clear the filter easily here. We also have the option of adding, in this case, if we wanted to see multiple different people for whatever reason, we can do the unchecking of select all. And let's see, I want to do we'll take a look at Milton. And I'm pretty sure there's Cornelius. So you could type in the box. I know for sure we've got Cornelius somewhere in here, quite a few of them actually. Select all search results, yes, and apply my filter. All right, so it's given me all of the Cornelius in the collection, or I hadn't typed fully out Cornelius, so you'll notice it gave me a Cornelia as one of the collections, but it has filtered down to all of those records that contain the CORN, or however far I got in that particular typing of Cornelius. So one of the cool features to use if you're trying to narrow things down, especially if they are subject keywords, creators. In fact, let me get over into one of the subject areas. Let's see, topical term. So at the moment, all of these are concatenated, but I do want to see anything that has, let's just put tour actually. Great. Okay, I can see down here that of the 7,350 records, which is the total number of row entries I have in the spreadsheet, I have 18 rows that returned to me as results. And these are the 18 that we see here. And these are all of the records where the partial word or tourism is in the topical terms. This can be helpful, especially if we want to reassign a particular term, or if we needed to pull these records out for any reason. It can be helpful to filter based on parts of those words. All right, and then you can clear filter while you are in this particular view. And then, of course, depending on your view, you can also come up to the filter to force a clear filter up here in the menu. In terms of duplicate info, so for example, if we go back over to the creator field, I can go into, again, home menu. So we haven't even touched the data menu yet. Home menu, and for me, the option is here. It's called conditional formatting. There are a number of different rules you could use or create to have Excel go through and then highlight or otherwise mark the type of data that meets your criteria. The one of most help that I typically use, especially when amalgamating or merging different vocabularies that were sort of inconsistently applied, I will take a look at duplicate values. And in this case, anytime there's a duplicate value, it will give it a light red box with reddish writing in it. And in here, you'll immediately see any of those light red boxes with the red text. This means that I have entries further in these records more than once. In some cases, it will help highlight, okay, great, we got the correct dates assigned each time for this particular Rosa Marvin entry. You may also see, for example, if we've applied this duplicate filter, we could then, I believe, go up here into filter. And then I want to filter by color. Oh, not that one, up here. Filter by color. And so as I go down to cell color, it's immediately giving me either what it calls, I guess, the rose color or the no fill, because those are the only two options I have in this column. And I'm going to say, yes, give me just the rose colored cells. So it's going to automatically filter for me all of the entries that have at least one other duplicate entry somewhere else within this record. So it's immediately giving me anything that's a duplicate based on cell color. And then I can do a further action here, and that is the sort, the A to Z sort. And I'm going to select that one because I want to see all of the instances where that name shows up all together. And to help ensure, in this case, did all of these people get the correct dates assigned to them in this different date field? Perhaps I want to check, okay, we've got let's see, I think 8 different Cecil collections. Should those perhaps actually be put together? For example, I can see over here we have a couple different entries of Cecil's papers, as well as a couple for the photograph collection. So it can help you identify where duplication may indicate some cleanup can happen, or where duplication can indicate that maybe the full record was duplicated or needs to be changed. So it can be helpful in a number of ways. Now, to get out of this, once you're done viewing or done cleaning up, you can, of course, open this filter box back up. I am actually going to show you the other way, which is to click on my little funnel in this top menu. And then here's the clear option with the red X. I'm going to do that. And then if I want to release the conditional formatting, these lovely rosé colored cells over here, I am going to say clear rules. So I'm just going to do clear rules for the entire sheet. So now the rose color is gone. Oops, did not mean to move that. All right, we covered sorting a little bit, but as part of the duplication there, I do want to show you also on the numbering here. So in this case, these are my fake accession numbers. I want the accession numbers to go from like smallest to largest, so I'll select ascending. In this case, because some of my accession numbers are blank, it went ahead and put blank first. I can go ahead and clear this by saying, don't show me any of the blanks, by unchecking the blank box. Apply. So now I'm seeing everything that has an accession number, which is the results are 7,185 out of my 7,350 records. And we've got the accession numbers now going in the ascending order. So this can be helpful as you're going through your accessions, if you're doing them from like earliest to latest or vice versa. I'll clear this out because I think perhaps the most important is, again, going back to this unique ID field. Let me skip back up to the top here. Going back to this ID field and doing the ascending sort here, this will help to ensure that no matter what sort of work you are doing on your data, as long as you've got it in the correct sorting order, then everything should match up appropriately. However, always test and check, and always keep a copy of your data just in case you need to revert a change or reestablish some data there. Okay, we've talked about some of the options for viewing your data in Excel. We're now going to take a look at Excel tools, and the top ones that I use quite a bit. We're going to take a look at how to reformat data, which can be very handy for multiple parts of our data. We'll take a look at the find and replace feature, which can be very powerful with benefits and risks. We'll take a look at how to remove duplicates, which is one of the a little bit more complex but incredibly helpful. And then we're going to take a look at text to columns, the basic version of which there is then an advanced version and Power Query. So we'll hop into Excel and execute each of these. All right, now that we're actually looking at transforming the data and manipulating it from its original form, I have copy and pasted the data from the overall large spreadsheet that we were working on. If you recall, we recommended that because as we're transforming data, it can be a little risky in terms of, especially as we're getting used to doing data cleanup and using some of these tools and functionality. Sometimes they don't always work the way we think they will, or sometimes our data doesn't always cooperate due to consistency or what have you. So we've taken a copy of the cells that I want to work on. We're going to go through formatting exercise and find and replace exercise with this data. You'll notice that also, as we recommended, I have grabbed the unique ID column. I do not plan on messing with this unique ID column, but it is important to have with the data that I am messing with, just in case we need to remarry it because we've sorted or done something to it where it's no longer in that original order. So with that in mind, we're going to take a look at titles and the title dates. And in particular, we've got some date cleanup in terms of some somewhat inconsistently used no date for ND and CA for circa. And then we also have CA with no period here. We also have some very specific dates of 8 of March, 1978, 20 of January, 1990, and perhaps our system, as with many systems, want it to be the 4 Ys for year, 2 Ms for month, and 2 Ds for day, for example. So let's do some find and replace cleanup first. I do want it to be specific to this title date column. I do not want it to try and apply the find and replace to the other columns. So I've highlighted my column C here. Still in the home menu, we have a find and select, in my Mac version at least, little spyglass here. We've got find, we've got replace, and then a few other options, but what we're interested in right now is that find replace option. And while I can't make the box bigger, I can walk you through what I am about to do. So for example, if we have a series of N period, D period, and we know for sure that we're no longer doing abbreviations, we want fully spelled out, I want to change everywhere in this column where it says N period, D period to no date. We have a few other options here. One is where we could stipulate if we were in a spreadsheet that had multiple tabs of sheets. Ours does not, but if it did, you could say, oh, just in this sheet or just in this row, or in our case, we want to select column because we very specifically want it just in the column we've highlighted. We are not messing with formulas just yet. We're going to leave that alone. And you could do some further, like it needs to match the case. So for example, if I wanted to only change, for whatever reason, the lowercase N period, D period, but I did not want to change the capitalized version, then I could have it specifically be strictly just the lowercase version. And then I can also further click only cells with just N period, D period, or the cell could share other data in addition to that N period, D period. That should not be the case in my data. And I also want to make sure that it's capitalized or not, it's going to be spelled out. So with that in mind, I have checked all of the different options. I've made sure it's by column. I'm going to go ahead and say replace all. It will tell me, in my software at least, that it has made the replacement and how many replacements. This is a good number to pay attention to because especially if you are trying to pinpoint the changes you are making, I want to see smaller numbers here because there should only be a couple dozen of these NDs floating around. However, sometimes when there's a larger number, it indicates, oh, I forgot to tell it just this column, and instead it changed the whole spreadsheet, in which case you'd want to do like a really quick undo button. All right, so in the data, it will have taken care of N period, D period, and in fact, I'll ask it to find all, and as we expected, it did not find anything. However, I will note we've got some N period and then just a D. No second period. So I also want to change those. Everything else remain the same. This specific column, replace all. Perfect. Now this one's a little bit more relatable, 198 replacements out of these 700. So that is a good number in terms of the ratio I'm working with. And then if I did want to continue with my find and replace, I could say, okay, I'm going to tackle CA period next. And in this case, the CA period, by its very nature, would have other data with it. So I definitely want to make sure that I'm not saying only the CA period in the cells. I want it to match lower and uppercase, so I'm also going to leave that unchecked. I do want it to stay within the column, and I do want to replace all. All right, 351 replacements. So similar-ish number to my no dates. That's a good number for me, and it's looking pretty clean on the data I'm seeing currently. Another transformation I want to make to the dates is these guys right here, where it's a mixture of numbers and letters. And for many of us, our database is like, we only want numbers for our dates. And so I'm going to highlight this column because, again, this is the only column where I want to mess with this data. And in this case, we do have a drop-down up here. Again, I'm still in my home menu here. This is a drop-down about midway through my menu, and I get options such as general, number, currency, accounting, short date, long date, etc., percentages, fractions. If you click on more number formats, we can also get into custom. And so as you scroll down, depending on what data you've worked on in the past, this could be a very long or very short menu. You'll notice I have some D, M, and Y for different date formats. None of them, however, have the Y's up front like I would like. So I am actually going to tell it which one I want. So I want the 4 Y's up front. I want, let's do the month and then the day. I'm doing spaces right now, but we'll see how I feel about that. And then I'm going to click OK. And so understandably, it did not change anything that had a date range where it was just the year. It changed for me anything that fit that criteria where it had the year, it had the month, and it had the day. And so we've got the YYYY, the 2 M's and the 2 D's here with spacing. Now, if I decide spacing looks weird, we can take that out. More number formats, custom. My formula is up here still. I just take those dates out. Okay. And no spaces now, which also looks a little weird. So I'm going to say, never mind, ×2. I'm going to space, but I also want the days now and then the month. And there you go. 4 Y's, we now have the, in this case, day and then month showing up here. So depending on what your data needs to be for your collections management system, you can transform, in this case, the dates and actually specify for it how you want those dates to show up, which when we're doing quite a bit of work with things that have dates, ranges of dates, also very specific dates, having this sort of ability to transform them, whether that is correcting ND to no date, or whether that is actually transforming it to numbers only, you do have some pretty straightforward options here. All right, the next thing we're going to take a look at is removing duplicates. So we covered initially how to first identify whether things were duplicates by doing that conditional formatting. I am now going to assign the filter icon or filter tool to this row because I want to sort where we only are seeing those duplicate values. So going up here, we're going to filter by color, that lovely rose color. And it may take it a second just because there are 7,000 plus it's thinking about. All right, so now we are only seeing those that are duplicates. So we have grabbed the unique ID column and the accession number column. For the purposes of this data, we have done that conditional formatting back in the home menu where we identified and asked it to highlight all duplicate values. We then used the filter tool to filter it so it only showed us the rose-colored cells indicating that this is duplicate value. And for our fake data, we are pretending that these accession duplicates mean that it's a duplication of the entire record. So true duplicate records versus the accession numbers was perhaps used twice, but the rest of the values themselves were unique. So double check your data to make sure. In this case, we're going to pretend that it is truly duplication of the entire record. And so we do want to remove those duplicates. So I'm going to highlight the column where I am honing in on this duplication issue. I'm going to go over to my data tab, middle menu, and ask it to remove duplicates. And it's the icon where there's blue and yellow squares, multiple, and then it has a little arrow, and then it shows just one blue square and one yellow square. Okay, so it's just popped up with a warning here asking me, do I want to expand my selection because I currently have only highlighted the accession number column. This is a same or similar pop-up you would get if you were sorting records based on a value in one column. And it's like, but wait, do you want the stuff to stay together? Usually the answer is yes. In this case, however, because we are focused on duplicates and we want it to remove duplicates that are only existing in one of the two columns, I am going to say no. In fact, just continue with the current selection, column B, remove duplicates. It then will pop up, okay, so just the accession number column, and yes, I'm going to click OK. And it's going to take a moment because there are 7,000. And then I'm going to get a little value, much like we did for the find and replace function. It's telling me 221 duplicate values were found and removed. And then 7,130 unique values remain. And then note that the counts could be empty cells, etc. So, okay, great. And then I want to clear this filter now. And so now we see all of the other unique values that still exist in our data. And if I were to run, just to double check, that conditional formatting again, highlight, duplicate, rows, and then go over to my handy little filter, filter by color, okay, cell color rows. All right, and just that one blank one there. So verifying no other duplicates happening here. And in fact, let me clear. I now have remaining just the unique values. Okay, one of the last tools we're going to cover, at least in terms of basic Excel tools before we get to Excel Power Query, is the text to column function. There is a more advanced text to column function as part of Excel Power Query. However, if you're doing a pretty straightforward slicing of your data, then this text to column may be just the best tool for the job. At the very least, practice with this one first. And so we are taking a look at, in this case, I grabbed the unique ID according to our recommendation. And then I have also grabbed the topical term column, where we have for some of our entries what is a concatenation of multiple different terms. We can see that these terms were combined or somewhat further specified with punctuation. The semicolons in this case looks like it is further specifying within a larger term. And the slash with the N usually indicates a new line entry, so a new term. Now, for my particular system, how, in this fake example, how the data went into this system is that this all went in as one term. So all of these, what would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 terms went in together as one term with some of the confusing and does not make sense to very human language readable with the \n. So I want to make sure that I'm separating them out using that \n, but retaining the semicolon in this case for those larger terms. So what I want to do is select the column that I am targeting. I'm going to click the text to column here, which is underneath the data tab in Excel. And it's going to ask me if I want to do it delimited or by fixed width. The majority of the time, like 99% of the time, at least in my data cleanup adventures, is that you're always going to select the delimited and identify a character to tell Excel, when you see this character, split it into a column. I have yet, I think, to use fixed width. So I'm going to select delimited. I'm going to go next. And in this case, I don't want any of these usual ones like tab, semicolon, column, space. Otherwise, my data would be across dozens of columns. And instead, I'm going to click Other. And this is actually 2 characters. Okay. It's not going to do it. So quick workaround here. Let me cancel back out. So just to let you know what happens. So in this basic version of text to column, it will only let me put 1 character in there and won't let me put the N in there. So I'm going to cancel. I'm going to do a quick find and replace. And instead of \n, find and replace, I am just going to have it be a good old \, replace all. 3,794. All right. So now we see no longer /n, just a slash. This should work for me because those slashes should only exist if they were a /n. Back into text to column, delimited, next. I have other ticked. We've got that \, now. Don't need to worry about the N. Next. It is now going to show me a preview, a fairly rough preview of what it's going to do with the first few entries so that you can get a sense of, okay, is the \ working, or no, was it used somewhere else? And now my data is extra diced. In this case, that's looking pretty good. So I'm going to say, go ahead and finish that. And you will now see I've got, in this case, the column remains, but with just the 1 term. And then in these next few columns are all of the terms that got expanded out and across based on that \. These now each have their own little column and are separate and distinct from the collective entry of that topical term. Okay, and where to get help. So the somewhat unusual one is, well, maybe for some of you, you're already aware, but taking a look at Gemini, which is now, I think, what used to be Bard, is the Google brand of AI currently. ChatGPT, of course, which is probably what everyone has heard about. There are several other AI engines out there and available for you. We're a Google household, and so using Gemini is what we use. And I'll cut over in a second for us to take a look at how to generate some of those prompts. But overall, it's a great way to ask the how do I do this kind of questions in a way where Google results wouldn't necessarily be helpful in that answer. And then another great support that I hadn't put on the slide, but YouTube. If the AI engines are not working for you, going to YouTube, especially if you like the hands-on walkthrough sort of thing, could be incredibly helpful for some of the different areas. Now, just keep in mind it won't be geared towards archives and museums data, but data is data. And so if you're able to form your prompt in a way where a search on YouTube will be fruitful, then you can definitely find some good stuff there. Okay, so we are taking a look at Gemini, what is now Gemini, used to be Bard. It'll probably be something else in a few months. We are taking a look at the AI interface. And I mean, much like how we have been conditioned through Google and elsewhere, there's this one little search bar down here, and you can ask any type of question. And so one of the questions I've asked before is, what are the most helpful but simple Excel, oh, sorry, I'm trying to type around my microphone here, Excel formulas. And it'll take a moment because it's thinking. And then we'll start giving you results. And so for my particular query, I was like, what are the most helpful but simple Excel formulas? And it's given a few different examples of what are some formulas to use. For Gemini, and probably because I had created a past account in the past, I had this prompt I used earlier. Let's show it. What are examples of basic Excel formulas that are most helpful for data cleanup? So this one was a bit more specific. And for this particular one, we got more specific and, in my mind, more helpful answers. So a great demonstration of how you ask the question is incredibly impactful as to the answer you get. So let me put that prompt back in here again, the more specific one. And so now we're getting ones that we will cover together: the trim, clean, substitute, these left, right, mid, upper, lower, proper. These are formulas that you could use instead of doing like a text to column or splitting based on delimiter. Because I am not as comfortable with formulas yet, I typically will use the delimiter functionality in both basic Excel and Excel query. But the point is that this knowledge is here and is definitely here to be mined if you are one who is good with asking questions and then perhaps iterating on those questions. We can get more specific and say, how do I eliminate white space in an Excel cell? All right, and in this case, there's a couple different ways to do it. And so it is going to give you all of the options. And I have seen in the past, as it walks through the options, it will sometimes also give me a sense of like, here's the most straightforward one. Or if your data is more nuanced, like here's the, like you would do it this way for this one. And I've even had it warn me to only use the functionality if it fit like this very specific use case. So not only is the AI giving you essentially results of what you're looking for, answers to your questions, it is opining on what may be the best or easiest to use or the riskiest to use, and ultimately is being incredibly helpful. So if you haven't played around with it yet, I definitely recommend, especially for work and data cleanup and data transformation. I think we're going to see AI more and more integrated into our work in that regard. All right, for next time, we were able to get to formulas in this one, so we will cover formulas and then start getting into Excel Power Query. And again, as I described it earlier, there's some great functionality in quote unquote the basic Excel. However, once you start getting more comfortable, or as your data transformation needs become more complex, then getting familiar with and starting to play around with your data in Power Query can be the way to go. So we'll do some examples for both of those next time. Okay, reminder of the resources. You've got the free access to the PDF, essentially, of the resource that I partnered with Oregon Heritage on, and also in partnership with Oregon Cultural Trust and Deschutes County Historical Society. So if you are interested in more detail, nuts and bolts, processes, best practices related to creating and cleaning collection information, then definitely go grab a copy. We have a couple webinars related, cataloging in general and crafting a catalog workflow. We've got a webinar around that, as well as that data cleanup webinar, Where to Begin, which is a good primer for getting into some of the detail of cleanup that we did today, and especially before we get into the Excel Power Query stuff next time. All right, that gives us a few moments for questions, so feel free to put those in the chat, and I'll answer those as the time remains. Otherwise, please feel free to get in touch if you have any other questions, connect with us. And as always, thank you so much for attending, and we'll see you next time.